Ecosystem. An ecosystem can be visualized as a functional unit of nature where living organisms interact among themselves and also with the surrounding physical environment. Ecosystem varies greatly in size from a small pond to a large forest or a sea. Many ecologists regard the entire biosphere as a global ecosystem, as a composite of all local ecosystem on Earth. Since this system is too much big and complex to be studied at one time, it is convenient to divide into two basic categories, namely terrestrial and aquatic. Forest, grassland and desert are some examples of terrestrial ecosystem. Ponds, lakes, waterland, river and estuary are some examples of aquatic ecosystem. Crop field and an aquarium may also be considered as man-made ecosystem. We will first look at the structure of ecosystem in order to appreciate the input, productivity, transfer of energy, food chain or web, nutrient cycling, and the output degradation and energy loss. We will also look at the relationship, cycle, chain, web that are created as a result of these energy flows within the system and their interrelationship. Ecosystem structure and function. In chapter 13, you have looked at the various components of the environment, abiotic and biotic. You studied how the individual biotic and abiotic factors affected each other and their surrounding. Let us look at this component in a more integrated manner and see how the flow of energy takes place within this component of the ecosystem. Interaction of biotic and abiotic components result in a physical structure that is characteristics for each type of ecosystem. Identification and enumeration of plant and animal species of an ecosystem gives its species composition. Vertical distribution of different species occupying different level is called stratification. For example, trees occupy top vertical strata or layer of a forest. Shrubs the second and herbs and grass occupy the bottom layer. The components of ecosystem are seen to function as a unit when you consider the following aspects: productivity, decomposition, energy flow, and nutrient cycling. To understand the ethos of an aquatic ecosystem, let us take a small pond as an example. This is fairly a self-sustainable unit and rather simple example that explain even the complex interactions that exist in an aquatic ecosystem. A pond is a shallow water body in which all the above mentioned four basic components of an ecosystem are well exhibited. The abiotic component is the water with all the dissolved inorganic and organic substances and the rich soil deposit at the bottom of the pond. The solar input, the cycle of temperature, day length and other climatic conditions regulate the rate of function of entire pond. The autotrophic component includes the phytoplankton, some algae and the floating submerged and marginal plant found at the edge. The consumer are represented by the zooplankton, the fish swimming and bottom dwelling form. The decomposer are the fungi, bacteria and flagellates, especially abundant in the bottom of the pond. This system performs all functions of any ecosystem and of the biosphere as a whole, that is, conversion of inorganic into organic material with the help of the radiant energy of the sun by autotrophs, consumption of the autotrophs by heterotrophs, decomposition and mineralization of the dead matter to release them back to reuse by the autotrophs. These events are repeated over and over again. There is unidirectional movement of energy towards the higher trophic level, and its dissipation and loss as heat to the environment. Productivity. A constant input of solar energy is the basic requirement for any ecosystem to function and sustain. Primary production is defined as the amount of biomass or organic matter produced per unit area over a time period by plant during photosynthesis. It is expressed in terms of weight, gram per meter square, or energy kilocalorie per meter square. The rate of biomass production is called productivity. It is expressed in terms of gram per meter square per year or kilocalorie per meter square per year. To compare the productivity of different ecosystems, it can be divided into gross primary productivity (GPP) and net primary productivity (NPP). Gross primary productivity of an ecosystem is the rate of production of organic matter during photosynthesis. A considerable amount of GPP is utilized by plant in respiration. Gross primary productivity minus respiration loss R is the net primary productivity NPP. GPP minus R equal to NPP. Net primary productivity is the available biomass for the consumption to heterotrophs, herbivorous and decomposer. Secondary productivity is defined as the rate of formation of new organic matter by consumer. Primary productivity depends on the plant species inhabiting a particular area. It also depends on a variety of environmental factors, availability of nutrient and photosynthetic capacity of plant. Therefore, it varies in different types of ecosystem. The annual net primary productivity of the whole biosphere is approximately 170 billion tons dry weight of organic matter. Of these, despite occupying about 70% of the surface, the productivity of the ocean are only 55 billion tons. Rest of course is on land. Discuss the main reason for the low productivity of ocean with your teacher. Decomposition. You may have heard of the earthworm being referred to as the farmer's friend. This is so because they help in breakdown of complex organic matter as well as in losing of the soil. Similarly, decomposer break down complex organic matter into inorganic substance like carbon dioxide, water and nutrient, and the process is called decomposition. Dead plant remains such as leaves, bark, flowers and dead remains of the animal including facial matter constitute detritus, which is the raw material for decomposition. The important steps in the process of decomposition are fragmented, leaching, catabolism, humidification and mineralization. Detritus. Earthworm break down detritus into smaller particles. The process is called fragmentation. By the process of leaching, water-soluble inorganic nutrients go down into the soil horizon and get precipitated as unavailable salt. Bacterial and fungal enzyme degrade detritus into simple inorganic substance. This process is called as catabolism. It is important to note that all the above steps in decomposition operate simultaneously on the detritus. Humidification and mineralization occurs during decomposition in the soil. Humidification leads to accumulation of a dark colored amorphous substance called humus that is highly resistant to microbial action and undergoes decomposition at an extremely slow rate. Being colloidal in nature, it serves as a reservoir of nutrient. The humus is further degraded by some microbes and release of inorganic nutrient occurs by the process known as mineralization. Decomposition is largely an oxygen-required process. The rate of decomposition is controlled by chemical composition of detritus and climate factor. In a particular climatic condition, decomposition rate is slower if detritus is rich in lignin and chitin and quicker if detritus is rich in nitrogen and water-soluble substance like sugar. Temperature and soil moisture are the most important climatic factors that regulate decomposition through their effect on the activity of the soil microbes. Warm and moist environment favor decomposition, whereas low temperature and anaerobiosis inhibits decomposition, resulting in build-up of organic materials. Energy flow. Except for the deep-sea hydrothermal ecosystem, sun is the only source of energy for all ecosystems on Earth. Of the incident solar radiation, less than 50% of its photosynthetically active radiation (PAR). We know that plant and photosynthetic bacteria autotrophs picked sun's radiant energy to make the food from simple inorganic material. Plants capture only 2 to 10% of the PAR, and this small amount of energy sustains the entire living world. So it is very important to know how the solar energy captured by the plant flow through different organisms of an ecosystem. All organisms are dependent for their food on producer, either directly or indirectly. So you find unidirectional flow of energy from the sun to producer and then to consumer. Is this in keeping with the first law of thermodynamics? Further, ecosystems are not exempt from the second law of thermodynamics. They need a constant supply of energy to synthesize the molecules they require to counteract the universal tendency towards increasing disorderliness. The green plant in the ecosystem are called producers. In terrestrial ecosystem, major producers are herbaceous and woody plant. Likewise, producers in an aquatic ecosystem are various species like phytoplankton, algae and higher plant. You have read about the food chain and web that exists in nature, starting from the plant or producer food chain, or rather web are formed such that an animal feeds on a plant or on another animal, and in turn is food for another. The chain or wave is formed because of this interdependency. No energy that is trapped into an organism remains in it forever. The energy trapped by the producer, hence, is either passed on to a consumer or the organism dies. Death of organism is the beginning of detritus food chain web. All animal depends on plant directly or indirectly for their food need. They are hence called consumer and also heterotrophs. If they feed on the producer, the plant, they are called primary consumer, and if the animal eat other animal which in turn eat the plant or their produce, they are called secondary consumer. Likewise, you could have tertiary consumers too. Obviously, the primary consumer will be herbivorous. Some common herbivores are insects, birds and mammals in terrestrial ecosystem, and mollusks in aquatic ecosystem. The consumers that feed on these herbivores are called carnivorous, or more correctly primary carnivores, though secondary consumer. Those animals that depend on the primary carnivores for food are labeled as secondary carnivores. A simple gauging food chain (GFC) is depicted below. Grass producer, goat primary consumer, man secondary consumer. The detritus food chain (DFC) begins with dead organic matter. It is made up of decomposer, which are heterotrophic organisms, mainly fungi and bacteria. They meet their energy and nutrient requirement by degrading dead organic matter or detritus. These are also known as saprotrophs. Sapro to decompose. Decomposer secrete digestive enzymes that break down dead and waste material into simple inorganic material, which are subsequently absorbed by them. An aquatic system (GFC) is the major conduit for energy flow. As against this, in a terrestrial ecosystem, a much larger fraction of energy flow through the detritus food chain than through the GFC. Detritus food chain may be connected with the grazing food chain at some level. Some of the degraded organisms of DFC are prey to the GFC animal. In a neutral ecosystem, some animals like cockroach, crow, etc. are omnivorous. This natural interconnection of food chain make it a food web. How would you classify human beings? Organism occupying a place in the natural surrounding or in a community according to their feeding relationship with the other organism. Based on the source of their nutrition or food, organisms occupy a specific place in the food chain that is known as their trophic level. Producers belong to the first trophic level, herbivorous primary consumer to the second, or carnivorous secondary consumer to the third. The important point to note is that the amount of energy decreases at successive trophic level. When any organism dies, it is converted to detritus or dead biomass that serves as an energy source for decomposer. Organisms at each trophic level depends on those at the lower trophic level for their energy demand. Each trophic level has a certain mass of living materials at a particular time called as the standing crop. The standing crop is measured as the mass of living organism biomass or the number in a unit area. The biomass of a species is expressed in terms of fresh or dry weight. Measurement of biomass in terms of dry weight is more accurate. Why? The number of trophic level in the grazing food chain is restricted as the transfer of energy flow follows 10% law. Only 10% of the energy is transferred to each trophic level from the lower trophic level. In nature, it is possible to have so many levels: producer, herbivore, primary carnivore, secondary carnivore in the grazing food chain. Do you think there is any such limitation in detritus food chain? Ecological pyramid. You must be familiar with the shape of the pyramid. The base of the pyramid is broad and it is narrow towards the apex. One great a similar shape wherever you express the food or energy relationship between organisms at different trophic level. This relationship is expressed in terms of number, biomass or energy. The base of each pyramid represents the producer or the first trophic level, while the apex represents tertiary or top level consumer. The three types of ecological pyramids that are usually studied are pyramid of number, pyramid of biomass, pyramid of energy. For details, any calculation on energy content, biomass or numbers has to include all organisms at the trophic level. No generalization we make will be true if we take only a few individuals at any trophic level into account. Also, given organism may occupy more than one trophic level simultaneously. One must remember that the trophic level represents a functional level, not a species as such. A given species may occupy more than one trophic level in the same ecosystem at the same time. For example, a sparrow is a primary consumer when it eats seeds, fruits, pea, and a secondary consumer when it eats insect and worm. Can you work out how many trophic level human beings function at in a food chain? In most ecosystems, all the pyramids of number of energy and biomass are upright, that is, producers are more in the number and the biomass than the herbivores, and herbivores are more in number and biomass than the carnivores. Also, energy at a lower trophic level is always more than at a higher level. There are exceptions to this generalization. If you were to count the number of insects feeding on the big tree, what kind of pyramids would you get? Now add an estimate of the number of small birds depending on the insect, as also the number of large birds eating the smaller. Draw the shape you would get. The pyramid of energy is always upright. Can never be inverted, because when energy flows from particular trophic level to the next trophic level, some energy is always lost as heat at each step. Each bar is the energy pyramid indicates the amount of energy present at each trophic level in a given time or annually per unit area. However, there certain limitations of ecological pyramids, such as it does not take into account the same species belonging to two or more trophic levels. It assumes a simple food chain, something that almost never exists in nature. It does not accommodate for a food web. Moreover, saprophytes are not given any place in ecological pyramids, even though they play a vital role in the ecosystem. Ecological succession. You have learned in chapter 13 the characteristics of population and the community, and also their response to environment and how such response vary from an individual response. Let us examine another aspect of community response to environment over time. An important characteristic of all communities is that their consumption and structure constantly changes in response to the changing environment condition. This change is orderly and sequential, parallel with the change in the physical environment. This change leads finally to a community that is in near equilibrium with the environment, and that is called a climate community. The gradual and fairly predictable change in the species composition of given area is called ecological succession. During succession, some species colonies an area and their population become more numerous, whereas population of other species decline and even disappear. The entire sequence of community that successively change in a given area are called series. The individual transitional communities are termed seral stage or seral communities. In the successive seral stage, there is a change in the diversity of species or organisms, increase in the number of species and organisms as well as increase in the total biomass. The present day communities in the world have come to be because of succession that has occurred over millions of years. Life started on Earth. Actually, succession and evolution would have been parallel process at that time. Succession is hence a process that starts in an area where no living organisms are there. This could be area where no living organism ever existed, say bare rock, or in area that somehow lost all the living organisms that existed there. The former is called primary succession, while the latter is termed as secondary succession. Example of area where primary succession occurs are newly cooled lava, bare rock, newly created ponds or reservoirs. The establishment of a new biotic community is generally slow. Before a biotic community of diverse organisms can become established, there must be soil. Depending mostly on the climate, it takes natural process several hundreds to several thousand years to produce fertile soil on the bare rock. Secondary succession begins in areas where natural biotic communities have been destroyed, such as in abandoned farmland, burned or cut forest land that have been flooded. Since some soil or sediment is present, succession is faster than primary succession. Description of ecological succession usually focuses on change in vegetation. However, these vegetational changes in turn affect food and shelter for various types of animals. Thus, as succession proceeds, the number and type of animal and decomposer also change. At any time during primary or secondary succession, natural or human-induced disturbances, fire, deforestation, etc., can convert a particular seral stage of succession to an earlier stage. Also, such disturbances create new conditions that encourage some species and discourage or eliminate other species. Succession of plants. Based on the nature of the habitat, whether it is water or very wet areas or it is on very dry areas, succession of plants is called hydarch or xerarch respectively. Hydarch succession takes place in wet areas and the successional series progresses from hydic to the mesic condition. As against this, xerarch succession takes place in dry areas and the series progresses from xeric to mesic condition. Hence, both hydarch and xerarch succession lead to medium water conditions, mesic, neither too dry, xeric, not too wet, hydric. The species that invade a bare area are called pioneer species. In primary succession on rock, these are usually lichen, which are able to secrete acid to dissolve rock, helping in weathering and soil formation. These latter pave way to some very small plants like bryophytes, which are able to take hold in a small amount of soil. They are with time succeeded by higher plants, and after several more stages, ultimately a stable climate forest community is formed. The climax community remains stable as long as the environment remains unchanged. With time, the xerophytic habitat gets converted into a mesophytic one. In primary succession in water, the pioneer are the small phytoplanktons which are replaced with time by rooted submerged plant. Rooted floating angiosperm followed by free floating plants, then reed swamp, marsh meadow, scrub, and finally the trees. The climax again would be a forest. With time, the water body is converted into land. In secondary succession, the species that invade depend on the condition of the soil, availability of water, the environment, as also the seeds or other probables present. Since soil is already there, the rate of succession is much faster and hence climax is also reached more quickly. What is important to understand is that succession, particularly primary succession, is a very slow process taking maybe thousands of years for climax to be reached. Another important fact is to understand that all succession, whether taking place in water or on land, proceed to a similar climax community, the mesic. Nutrient cycling. We have studied in class 11 that organisms need a constant supply of nutrient to grow, reproduce and regulate various body functions. The amount of nutrient such as carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium, etc. present in the soil at any given time is referred to as standing state. It varies in different kinds of ecosystem and also on a seasonal basis. What is important is to appreciate that nutrients which are never lost from the ecosystem, rather they are recycled time and again indefinitely. The movement of nutrient elements through the various components of an ecosystem is called nutrient cycling. Another name of nutrient cycling is biochemical cycle, living organism, rock, air, water. Nutrient cycle are of two types, gaseous, the sedimentary. The reservoir for gaseous type of nutrient cycle, example nitrogen carbon cycle, exist in the atmosphere, and for the sedimentary cycle, example sulfur and phosphorus cycle, the reservoir is located in earth's crust. Environmental factor, example soil, moisture, pH, temperature, etc. regulate the rate of release of nutrient into the atmosphere. The function of the reservoir is to meet with the deficit which occur due to imbalance in the rate of influx and efflux. We have made a detailed study of nitrogen cycle in class 11. Here we discuss carbon and phosphorus cycle. Ecosystem carbon cycle. When you study the composition of living organism, carbon constitutes 49% of dry weight of organism and is next only to water. If we look at the total quantity of global carbon, we find that 71% carbon is found dissolved in ocean. The oceanic reservoir regulate the amount of carbon dioxide in atmosphere. Do you know that the atmosphere only contains about 1% of total global carbon? Fossil fuel also represent a reservoir of carbon. Carbon cycling occur through atmosphere, ocean and through living and dead organisms. According to one estimate, 4 into 10 to the 13 kilogram of carbon is fixed annually in the biosphere through photosynthesis. A considerable amount of carbon returned to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide through respiratory activity of the producers and consumers. Decomposer also contribute substantially to carbon dioxide pool by their processing of waste material and dead organic matter of land or ocean. Some amount of fixed carbon is lost to sediment and removed from circulation. Burning of wood, forest fire and combustion of organic matter, fossil fuel, volcanic activity are additional source for releasing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Human activity have significantly influenced the carbon cycle. Rapid deforestation and massive burning of fossil fuel for energy and transport have significantly increased the rate of release of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Ecosystem phosphorus cycle. Phosphorus is a major constituent of biological membrane, nucleic acid and cellular energy transfer system. Many animals also need large quantity of this element to make cell, bone and teeth. The natural reservoir of phosphorus is rock, which contain phosphorus in the form of phosphate. When rock are weathered, minute amount of this phosphate dissolve into water into soil solution and are absorbed by the root of the plant. Herbivores and other animals obtain this element from plants. The waste product and the dead organism are decomposed by phosphate cellulizing bacteria releasing phosphorus. Unlike carbon cycle, there is no respiratory release of phosphorus into atmosphere. Can you differentiate between the carbon and phosphorus cycle? The other two major and important differences between carbon and phosphorus cycle are: firstly, atmospheric inputs of phosphorus through rainfall are much smaller than carbon inputs, and secondly, gaseous exchange of phosphorus between organism and environment are negligible. Ecosystem service. Healthy ecosystems are the base for a wide range of economic, environmental and aesthetic goods and services. The product of the ecosystem processes are named as ecosystem services. For example, healthy forest ecosystem purify air and water, mitigate drought and floods, cycle nutrient, generate fertile soil, provide wildlife habitat, maintain biodiversity, pollinate crops, provide storage site for carbon and also provide aesthetic, cultural and spiritual values. The value of such service or biodiversity is difficult to determine. It seems reasonable to think that biodiversity should carry a hefty price tag. However, Constanga and his colleagues have very recently tried to put price tag of nature's life support services. Researchers have put an average price tag of US $33 trillion a year of these fundamental ecosystem services, which are largely taken for granted because they are free. This is nearly twice the value of the global gross national product GNP, which is US $18 trillion. Out of the total cost of various ecosystem services, the soil formation accounts for about 50% and contribution of other services like recreation and nutrient cycling are less than 10% each. The cost of climate regulation and habitat or wildlife are about 6%